Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last afternoon session of the conference. Thanks for sticking with us. We are going to start off with a presentation from John Englert from the NRCS Plant Materials Centers. John, you can go ahead and turn on your video and share your screen while I give you an introduction. Hi.
Hi.
John Englert has been the National Program Leader for Plant Materials with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service in Washington, D.C. since 2008 and has been with the agency for over 29 years. John provides guidance and support for activities at NRCS's 25 plant materials centers and technical leadership on agency-wide vegetation and seed issues. Today, John will be providing an update on native plant materials development activities at the PMCs. John, thanks for being here, and you're good to take it away. Your screen looks good.
Okay, excellent. How's the audio?
I can hear you well.
Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. When I spoke with Melanie a couple of months ago, she wanted a kind of an update on what plant material centers were doing in the native plant development arena. So today I'm going to talk for a few minutes about what our plant material centers are and what they do, and then of course focus on our plant development activities. So first of all, just to kind of set the stage for the agency that I work for, NRCS provides support primarily to private land farmers, ranchers, and foresters. And plant material centers, or PMCs, are critical to generating the vegetative information and tools that are used by the agency to support the NRCS mission. Quite often, though, the work of PMCs also benefits many other federal and state agencies and other sectors. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along this morning. So NRCS currently operates 25 PMCs across the country. As the map up on the screen shows, they're in all different areas of the country. And that allows us to be able to evaluate plants that will be used in different environments in NRCS conservation programs to solve specific natural resource concerns, such as for soil stabilization, improving soil, water, and air quality, providing forage for livestock, and enhancing wildlife and pollinator habitat. PMCs are working farms where we conduct research on conservation plants, both to develop new releases and to figure out how to grow and use them. We also produce limited quantities of the foundation seed or plants that we've released to the public to continue to transfer that material to commercial seed growers that want to produce the materials that NRCS has released. So the picture on the upper left-hand corner of the screen is our Plant Materials Center located in Bridger, Montana. So when the Soil Conservation Service, which is now the NRCS, was first authorized by Congress in 1935 to address nationwide issues of soil erosion, the agency realized it needed seed and plants for demonstration projects. The commercial industry at the time for growing conservation and native seed had not developed yet. So the Soil Conservation Service established nurseries to grow out their own plant materials for those demonstration projects. And it was these soil conservation nurseries that soon realized that some of the plant germplasm they were growing had improved traits that would more quickly stabilize eroding soils or provide forage for livestock. So they started to evaluate these plants with desired traits and began to make them available to interested growers for increase. And this is really the genesis of what our program is today, because in the mid-1950s, as the conservation seed and plant industry expanded, Congress closed the nurseries, reopened some of them as plant material centers, to continue that plant evaluation and release function. So thinking back on our 85-year history of plant selection and releasing plants to the public, the graph on the left is a snapshot of plant development activities of the NRCS nurseries and PMCs over the past 85 years. The agency has released more than 760 conservation plants to the public. About 580 of those continue to be active today, and nearly all produced by the seed and plant industry. PMC's work with native species, the PMC work with native species far outweighs some of our earlier work with introduced species. And we're going to talk a little bit about, in just the next slide, I believe, about how NRCS uses that myriad of plant materials that have come out of the PMCs. This next chart describes more of the successes and evolution of the NRCS plant development program. So the chart includes a breakdown of active releases of that 580 releases that are still used by release type. And when we talk about release types, I'm referring to the levels of plant development that are recognized by ASCA, which is the entity that coordinates seed certification efforts. And if we were to overlay some time periods on this chart, we would see that the cultivars released by PMCs were primarily released through the 1980s. And most of the cultivars were intended to stabilize soil, provide forage, and restore function to natural landscapes. In the early 1990s, ASCA developed the pre-varietal release categories, which include tested, selected, and source identified. And there are specific guidelines that define each of these types. Pre-varietal releases have less development and testing, but are more useful for some conservation and restoration goals. And PMCs have made releases in all three pre-varietal types, but a little over a decade ago, we settled on the selected class release category for most of our future pre-varietal plant development efforts. The selected type release offers us some of the same provenance assurances as a source identified type, but also provides additional evaluations and testing that help make sure that this named germplasm will perform as intended when used for natural resource conservation projects. So I mentioned that NRCS assists farmers, ranchers, and foresters. There's quite a range of NRCS assistance provided, and this list represents several of the major NRCS vegetative practices that involve planting seed. And at the top, we have practices that support more managed situations, such as around agricultural lands or highly disturbed areas. And in this area, cultivars are most frequently recommended because they provide specific characteristics, greater uniformity, proven performance, and are more widely adapted. At the bottom, we have practices that support more natural situations, such as those with a greater focus on wildlife and pollinator habitat and restoration activities. And it's here that where the pre-varietal releases are more appropriate for those activities. With their increased diversity and intended usually for a narrower area of use. And this is the area that I assume most of the participants here today focus on. So PMCs often work on plant development activities across this entire spectrum to ensure that NRCS staff and private land producers have appropriate plant materials for the intended purpose. And there's certainly crossover of plant materials used across this spectrum based on the natural resource concerns and NRCS customers trying to address. So to sum up some of the work that's done by PMCs to develop new conservation plants, not all PMCs are involved in new plant development, but for those that are, the emphasis is on native, ASCA, natural tract selected class releases. So we do not purposefully manipulate the germplasm we work with, but we do evaluate and may select accessions that perform and represent the genetic diversity of the original population and range of intended use for the new release. Additionally, we look at the agronomic qualities that will help make commercial increase feasible. And this is all consistent with the goals of the National Seed Strategy. Another point just to keep in mind is that new plant development must also address a gap in the commercially available conservation plants needed to carry out the NRCS mission. And as a bonus, PMC releases are also frequently applicable to the goals of many other federal agencies, state agencies, other entities and partnerships, and the public. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, we want each PMC plant release to be successful, not just for the end user, but to be viable for commercial growers. NRCS does not purchase or provide seed or plants to private landowners. The landowners purchase it commercially to implement NRCS practices, conservation activities. So it's really imperative that any new plants released by NRCS are available in the commercial trade for anyone to purchase. So my final slide, just thinking about about that 85-year history of plant selection, plant development work that have been done by NRCS plant material centers. We've historically worked cooperatively with many others on the development of conservation plants. And there's opportunities for continued future cooperation with others when our goals intersect. So we can work together, not just on plant development activities, but also on technology needed to produce and use native plants in conservation and restoration projects. So just to wrap this up, I hope this presentation has provided some context for the plant development work at NRCS PMCs. And I also hope there are opportunities to identify potential collaboration work where our goals intersect to leverage the resources we have to advance native plant development efforts. So that's it. Thank you very much. And I think maybe we have a few minutes for questions.
Yes, we do. Looks like we just got one question come in, but just a reminder, people can put their questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom view, and you can like questions to send them higher to the top to be more likely to be answered. So here's a question for you, John. How does one find a list of seed available through the PMCs?
That's a good question. So if you go to our plant materials website, which we have, I listed it in the summary for this talk, as well as it's on the last slide here down at the bottom of the slide, or just Google NRCS Plant Material Centers and it'll come up. And there's a link for conservation plants. And that link will take you over to all of the different plants that are available, that are active, those 580 active conservation plants that are still out there in the commercial trade. And there's links to the release brochures for each one of those, so you can find out more about each plant. And there's links from that page over to the commercial sources of those plant materials. But for those folks that are interested in commercial increase of NRCS materials, you can contact the Plant Material Center that released those, and they can provide foundation quality seed to start commercial production of those.
Great, thank you. Here's another one. Are you working with departments of transportation to develop right-of-way species?
One of the beauties of what we do is that it covers just a whole range of different types of purposes. So we work primarily with grasses, but we're doing more and more with native forbs, wildflowers, and legumes. So, thinking about that palette of plants and the 580 that are out there and active, and for all different environments, there's actually quite a bit of material out there right now that has been released by NRCS specifically for, different areas, including rights of ways. So we do have, just thinking about, some of the selections that we have, some of them are shorter, some of them are taller. So there's opportunities, I think, for that plant selection. But no, we're not working specifically with Department of Transportation on any activities, but hopefully what we have out there will meet some of their needs.
Great. Okay, we have time for one more question. Here's one. It says, I know that PMCs are not supposed to compete with commercial nurseries. Sometimes this seems like a gray area. What is the process for determining whether a plant development project is appropriate for a PMC?
Well, I mean, we don't compete with private industry, with private growers. All of the materials that we develop as part of our release program need to go to a commercial grower. So we do not produce materials that go onto NRCS conservation practices. As I've stated, landowners, purchase those from commercial growers. So while there might be some instances, such as some of the work that we've done in the past with the National Park Service, where we produce specific germplasm, we do very little of that anymore.
Great. All right, thank you so much, John. And with that, I'll hand it over to Maria to introduce our next speaker.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John. I learned a lot from your talk, and we appreciate you taking the time to share that with everyone. I just wanted to send a quick reminder to everyone to vote in the photo contest in Whova if you haven't already, because we'll be counting votes at 2:45 Pacific. So you have until then to vote. And a reminder that the top 2 winners will receive a copy of a book from one of our keynote speakers. Okay, so with that, I'll be introducing our next speaker, Melanie Giesler. Melanie, you can go ahead and get set up if you're ready. Melanie's going to kick off
the screen share is still on for the previous speaker. Sorry.
No
Sorry about that.
No worries. Thanks, John.